Hello and welcome to this presentation of EdTech from IMS Global. My name is Ian Weddle and I'm the Program Manager for EdTech. This presentation is for you if your organization is currently or wants to use the OneRoster specification for rostering users. Regardless of if this is your first time using OneRoster or you have considerable experience using the standard to exchange data, EdTech can help you answer the questions of, am I doing this right? And more importantly, will this work? So, today I'll be talking about some of the common problems faced by users, how EdTech can help you address and overcome those problems, and how to join the growing number of organizations using EdTech. So OneRoster is an established specification. It's used around the world. But as we all know, every implementation is different. Small changes in configuration or development can lead to problems even between certified organizations. And fixing that kind of incompatibility can take time and effort. So how does EdTech help? It helps by confirming that your data is compliant with the OneRoster specification, making sure that you are meeting the needs of the specification precisely. Also, it helps you by seeing what data elements are being populated and which aren't within your dataset, and then how consistently are you populating them? What's the accuracy of the information you're sending? Are you filling out all of those relevant fields? It then also helps you identify any gaps between your dataset and what the supplier might actually need for their application. Maybe they've extended the specification to include additional metadata, or maybe you're providing something that they don't need. EdTech can help you identify that. And finally, it can help you know that your data meets the specification and is compatible with the supplier's needs. It can help you answer that question of will this work and help guarantee success and smoother implementations. The first step in this process we call characterization. During characterization, we create a unique fingerprint of your entire dataset, looking at not just the individual elements, but how the whole comes together and meets the OneRoster specification. During this process, we will analyze not just your data, but also its consistency, how it flows, how it works. And at the end of this, we'll generate a report that shows you where you're aligned with the specification, how well you're aligned, and if there are any areas that you need to pay attention to or be aware of during integrations. Another thing that happens during characterization is that if we do find any issues, any discrepancies with how you're meeting the specification, we'll highlight those, bring your attention to them, and tell you what steps you can take to resolve those issues. Obviously, doing this is something that sounds very complex. The information is very important, but creating characterizations isn't all that difficult. Let me show you. Creating a characterization is very straightforward. First, we let you give it some defining characteristics to help you identify it later. You can assign it a color, give it a name you can remember, and add some details about why you made this characterization. Maybe you've had an update from a sys vendor, you're trying a new configuration or some new filters, or it's just that you want to try and make sure that your data is as ready as possible and you've not run a characterization in a while. Once you've entered that, we like you to tell us where this data is coming from. And so we have a selection of common sources here. If you do not see the one that you use listed, please select Other and provide us with the name of it. This allows us to expand the list and also report back to these vendors if we spot issues with their applications. Next, we ask you to identify the specification. Right now, we're supporting OneRoster version 1.1 CSV and REST for bulk rostering. If you select REST, you will be able to then enter the host name of your application and tell us what form of security configuration you're using. OAuth 1 SHA-256 or OAuth 2. If you're using OAuth 2, you'll also need to provide us with the access token URL. For the sake of this demo, we'll be using OneRoster CSV. Similarly, you have the option of providing us details of where the file is hosted and login credentials for that, or, as it is a zip file, most people have access to it and you might want to upload it directly, and that's what we'll be doing here. Before I upload that file though, do note this yellow bar here telling you that uploaded or accessed data is not retained by EdTech, and all files and information is deleted at the end of the characterization. As I was saying earlier, we create this characterization unique fingerprint. We're not storing or manipulating your data. Now, if I click Browse, we'll select the files that we're going to use. Once that's done, all you have to do is click the Submit Characterization button, and the characterization process runs in the background. What's happening here is the file's being uploaded, and we're analyzing the data within it, all of those CSV files, looking at them both to make sure they conform to the specification, and also they align with themselves. The data within them is consistent. And here you can see the results. This is the characterization report, the unique fingerprint of your data. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can see the name and identification information that you provided earlier, along with a little bit of additional information about what was run, what specification you were running against, when the report was generated, the name of the file that was used, etc. In the middle panel here, you can see a very high-level overview. And what you're looking for are these amber check marks. Amber and green check marks tell you that the file, the dataset was conformant. An amber check mark telling you that it's conformant, but we found something within it that we think is of interest for you to know, something that you might want to be aware of that may impact your compatibility with products later. You can download the report in a CSV format, and then also, if you're successful and you have amber check marks, you can compare directly from within the report with products within the application. Digging into the report, as we scroll below that little header section with the overview, we get into the details. And here you'll see each of the files within a OneRoster version 1.1 CSV rostering dataset. If I expand this, we can show you what information we've identified. First off, as you remember, there's an amber check. This means that the dataset academicsessions.csv was compliant with the specification in this instance. However, we've identified something in it that we wanted to alert you to. And that's why you're seeing that amber dot on the left-hand side of the screen, and on the right, the highlighted section explaining what we've spotted. And what we've noticed here is that although the data is conforming with the specification, required fields have been consistently populated, prohibited fields have never been populated, there is one optional field, the parent source ID field, that was never populated. We've highlighted that because we don't know whether that's expected in your dataset or not, but we want you to be aware that this is happening. It may cause issues later on. It might be that you say, this is completely correct. I'm not expecting to see any parent source IDs referenced here. This is a good sign that things are working as you'd expect. Your data is formed the way you expect to see it. Otherwise, you might say, hey, I've got a lot of data here. There's a lot of interacting relationships. There are parent source IDs referenced. Why am I not seeing it in my data set? You can also see within the report columns like min-max. This is telling you the shortest and longest length of characters for a field within the data set. So for source ID, you can see we have some are 7 characters long, some are 8. For title, some are 2, some are 11. For type, 4, 13. Where this is useful is looking to see how your data has been populated. If you're expecting every field to be populated with a 5-digit code and you see that some of them are 0/5, you're missing some. If you see 2/5, you know some have been incorrectly entered. We're giving you an easy way to check that information. We also tell you from the specification what format that field's meant to be, whether it's required or optional within the specification, or prohibited in the case of the 2 fields used with delta processing, and the field name. With the CSVs, we also give you the position within the file, as that's also important. Looking further down, we'll dig into orgs here, and we can see very similar. You've met the specification requirements, you are compliant, amber checkmark. However, again, we've spotted a field that's inconsistently populated, and it's that parent source ID again. Now, the fact that we're seeing none earlier and inconsistent here might make you wonder what's happening, because maybe that's okay, maybe that's unique to your system. But you can see how the report gives you a very fine-grained, at the individual field level, view into what's going on, telling you the size of the information available, whether it's been populated consistently or not, how that data is structured. So that's giving you a happy case. But if I click Characterizations here, we'll see the Characterization list screen. And here's that characterization we've just created. But let's take a look at what happens when a case fails. And you can see that here because of the red exclamation point. Straight away, you can see that there's been a problem. To start with, we've got these red exclamation points telling us that there are errors, there are problems that make this file non-conformant. Beyond that, you can also see we're only seeing 4 CSV files here, rather than the normal 6 or 7 that we'd expect to see within a OneRoster CSV zip file. This means that something's occurred, and as we see below, we've hit the maximum number of critical errors. There's so much wrong here that we actually had to stop processing the file. What that means is you cannot compare this file. You cannot go comparing this data set against other vendor products that are in EdTech because you've not got a compliant set of data to run against. But what kind of problems have we found? Again, you can download the report to look into these as a CSV file at your leisure. Alternatively, we can drill into it here. First off, in academic sessions, we're seeing something fairly significant. We're missing a header. What this means is the CSV file, as we all know, is a structured file. Those columns have got to be there. And if we're missing an entire column, in this case start date, that's a problem that means this file is not conformant with the specification. Moving on, let's look at demographics. In demographics, we've got another problem that can occur with CSV files. We've identified that the column public school resident status is currently in position 17 within your dataset. However, it should be in position 16. It sounds like those columns have got switched somehow. However, since that's a problem that would obviously persist throughout the data, we have no way of checking whether it's continuous or whether it's just in that header column. We're saying, look, this is a problem you need to investigate and fix. And this is something you might need to speak with your SIS vendor about if you have this kind of error occur. Looking in courses.csv, we're seeing another problem that we see quite frequently. The column subjects uses an enumerated list, and in this case we found an invalid enumeration. We're telling you in record 1 there's an invalid enumeration. So in this case we're not only telling you what the problem is, you see there's a report pointing you to the official SED list that we use for identifying the valid enumerations, but we're telling you where within your dataset it is. It's within record 1. If there were multiple instances of that, you'd see the first 20 of them listed here. So that gives you an example of how not only does OneEdTech show you when you are compliant what's going on within your data, it also shows you within the characterization report when there are problems, what's going on, and guides you to those steps that you need to take them, whether that's ensuring you're including a missing header, or correcting field orders, or correcting data within a specific record. And that's how you create characterizations. As you can see from the list screen here, you can create them for both CSV and REST. The REST characterization report is very similar to the CSV report, except we report on each of the collections, and within each collection, we provide you a little bit more of a drill down as we can approach each endpoint separately. Within each endpoint, we'll tell you the total collection size and how many we sampled from it. The reason for that being, obviously, if you have a very large data set, you don't want us to be making REST calls to your system to record all the million records. What we do is we take a sample, sampling some records from the start of your data set, some from the middle, and some from the end. And that lets us get a good idea about how your data is structured and formed. When we expand these sections, you'll see we're going to give you alerts, not just about the data, the field elements themselves, but also about the parameters that you support within REST. And here you can see that we're supporting a deprecated security protocol. We're alerting you to this fact. You are compliant, you're supporting the required SHA-256, but we've identified that you're also supporting a deprecated protocol. You might want to fix that. It is a slight security hole. Other than that, we're telling you whether you support all the other parameters used by the specification. Within each of the endpoints, we'll give you that same kind of reporting as you saw in the CSV file, reporting on min-max lengths, telling you which fields are required or optional, highlighting where fields have been inconsistently or not populated, just so that you're aware of those and able to work with them later. Scrolling down, let's look at students. If I expand students, we can see, I click that a little too quickly there, and you'll see it will shrink away from us again. Click it again. We can see that each of the endpoints is being treated separately here. This was a very small data set because we were testing at this stage, but again, we're warning you that this endpoint is supporting that deprecated security protocol, and we're showing you within the endpoint which fields have been consistently populated, the minimum and maximum lengths within them, so you can see how the data is forming within them. We're also seeing multiplicity, so where fields are optional, doesn't have to be populated, it's optional. It can have a multiplicity of 0, and in this case it does. That means it was never populated within the dataset. minimum max length also 0, telling you never there, and you're getting that notification that this field's optional. It wasn't supported within the characterized dataset, which is okay because it's an optional field. However, this may cause issues if the data is required by a consumer system. So we're warning you, okay, you're meeting the specification requirements, you are compliant with the specification. However, this may cause problems in comparisons later. And you can see how this gives you a very detailed view into, particularly if you're using REST, how each endpoint is responding, what information is coming back from that endpoint, the way it's structured, and also if there was additional metadata or additional information being returned, you'd be seeing that in this report as well. So it gives you a very easy way to see what a vendor or supplier sees, what data they have available to them when they reach out and access your endpoints. Once you've successfully completed a characterization, the next step of the process we call comparison. During comparisons, what we do is we take that characterization report, that digital fingerprint of your data we've just generated, and we compare it against similar fingerprints for suppliers' products needs. Now, the suppliers have gone through a similar process to what you've just done, where they have identified for us what their product needs to work, what they need to handle the rostering from your organization. They will have identified any additional metadata or any eccentricities within their configuration of the OneRoster specification. This may be something like making an optional field required. For example, things like email addresses or usernames are sometimes optional within the specification, but may be required by a specific vendor's product. So, during the comparison process, we're going to take your fingerprint and compare it with that supplier's product's fingerprint. It's very important to remember during this that although we're comparing your characterizations, we're not actually exchanging data or comparing the specific data fields themselves. As I mentioned during the characterization process, we don't store your data, we do not manipulate your data or exchange your data. But what we will do is identify any of those compatibility issues, those gotchas that will cause problems during an implementation. We'll highlight those for you. If you're compatible with that supplier's product, we'll tell you that, but we'll alert you to any extra areas that we think you should pay additional attention to during testing. Things like metadata. If, however, we identify problems, again, we'll let you know about these critical issues, and like in the characterization report, we'll highlight them for you and give you steps to help you resolve them. Let's take a look at that. The easiest way to make a comparison from within EdTech once you've completed a successful characterization is by clicking the Compare button. This button's only enabled once you've achieved a successful characterization shown by either all amber or all green check marks or a combination of those check marks. Clicking the Compare button here will pop up this modal window in which you can search for and find a product that you might want to compare against, and then quickly click the Launch button to launch a comparison. During this process, we take the digital fingerprint that we've created during the characterization of your dataset, and we're comparing it to a similar fingerprint of the product's needs. And what you'll see here in the comparison report is an overview of what's happening at the top of the screen. Again, like the characterization report, on the left we show you what you did, which characterization you used, which product you were comparing with, what specification you were using. Over on the right, we're showing you that we've found some problems. We're saying that this looks like it would be incompatible. And looking at that overview in the middle, you can see why. Again, we've used that traffic light metaphor, green and amber checks showing where compatibility was achieved, the amber check mark highlighting that there's some additional information. Maybe the vendor has provided some notes, maybe there's something that would be worthwhile you spending more time testing. We'll have highlighted that in there. But then also these red exclamation points, revealing where there are issues that would prevent a smooth implementation or maybe stop one from happening altogether. Let's take a look at what that means. Delving down into the detail of the report, you'll find information from the vendor. Here you can see they provided links to their implementation documentation, online help, product support information, and also some high-level notes information. Within that, though, we can now drill down, like we did in the characterization report, within the specific files. With a green check mark, this is telling us that within academic sessions, the data we're providing and the data that the vendor needs match exactly. The vendor's not provided any additional information about this file. Everything is good to go. We'll next look at this amber check on orgs.csv. Looking at this, again, you're seeing a lot of green where everything is aligning, but here we've highlighted in amber that there's some additional information here. The consumers required this field, but it's been provided consistently in your dataset, so that's okay. They've also included a note telling you that it's required in their instance. So what's happening here is they've taken a field that is normally optional within the OneRoster specification, but they've made it required because their product requires it. We alert you to that fact. We tell you that this shouldn't be a problem for you because it was consistent within your characterized dataset. But again, that alert's there to warn you that just because it was there in the characterized dataset, it's something you might want to test in their platform, make sure it's working smoothly, and make sure to keep an eye on as you move forward and send them more data to make sure you're always including that field. Then we can see these red exclamation points. Let's take a look at them. In classes.csv, everything looks good to start with. We're seeing a lot of the green columns showing where we're matching their specification expectations. But right at the end, we're seeing a red bar, and this is showing where a critical issue has occurred. What's happened is that the vendor has added metadata. They've extended the OneRoster specification to include custom metadata. And here you can see they're asking for department information. They've made it optional within their spec, but because this is CSV, even an optional column must be included within the file. And unfortunately, this custom metadata field's used by the consumer, but it wasn't provided in the characterized dataset. It wasn't in your data. Therefore, it needs to be included to match the shape of the CSV that they're expecting. We've highlighted that this is an issue with the consumer of the data, including the metadata, with this little C flag over at the far end there. If we look in courses.csv, it looks very, very similar. Again, the consumer, the vendor, has included metadata, and even though they've said the field's optional, because this is a CSV, you need to include that column in the spreadsheet. It needs to be in there. Finally, looking at users.csv, here, again, things are looking good, but we're spotting a couple of differences. For example, we have this amber row here that is a note. This is where the vendors provided additional information to tell you about how they're using the data. In this case, within the CSV file for users, email is an optional field. But the vendor has noted that email is required for teachers but optional for students. As there's only a single users file, you couldn't make the field required because even though it would be required for teachers, you'd also have made it required for all users, including students. By including a note here, the vendor can give you this information without restricting in how you provide the data. It's letting you know that you need to make sure you've included that teacher email. A little bit lower down, we're seeing a couple of extra colors. We've got those greens again telling us where things have matched up well, but we've got an amber and a red. The amber here is alerting you to the fact that you've included some custom metadata. Now, this might not be a problem, but it could cause a problem because the vendor's not asking for it. It's not part of their fingerprint. So we've given that a P flag. We're saying you are providing more than you need to. It's something that they've not asked for. It might cause a problem. Similarly, underneath, we can see where there is a problem. The vendor has required a piece of metadata. They're requiring this primary org. They've noted each user needs to be associated with a primary organization. They're telling you what they're using this field for. But EdTech's alerted you to the fact that this custom metadata field is required by them, but wasn't included in your dataset. And this means at the moment you would be incompatible. So again, you're seeing that C flag, and it's highlighted in red. And that's just a quick overview of how the comparison report, when things don't go well, can tell you exactly what's happening, where you're not aligning well with that vendor. But what are some other ways that you can launch comparisons? You could launch it from here, but you could also look at the EdTech product catalog. And in this, we have a wide list of products, in this case, sample products from our testing environment, that have been modeled by vendors participating in the EdTech program that you can compare against. You can compare against them directly by clicking on the buttons here. And if you use CSV or REST, or a combination of the two, you can filter to see just one or the other. And if you go to compare against something that uses both, such as astrophysics, it will compare like for like. So if I compare my demo for districts, which was a REST comparison, it will compare against the REST format for astrophysics. The reason being, obviously, you cannot provide a CSV via REST, and REST is not a CSV file. This, though, means that you can look across any product that you are compatible with. If you've run a characterization, you'll be able to compare only with those products that you have a chance of comparing well with. Again, the screen looks very familiar to you. The only difference here is when you launch from a product, you select which characterization you want to use. And that's why it's important to give it a name you can remember, because then it will be easier for you to spot which characterization you want to compare with which product. As you can see here, when I change to a name you can remember, that was a CSV comparison, and we can see we're now comparing against their CSV consumer, like we did in that earlier comparison example. Maybe you want to learn more about a product. You can click on it and you'll find the information that we have about it in the IMS product directory. You'll also see which formats it's compatible with, which specifications it works with, and you can directly compare to it from here as well. Comparisons, like characterizations, are things that you will run multiple times. Examples of needing to run them multiple times could be, like in this case, where a name you can remember dataset didn't compare successfully. We might go back and make changes, add in that custom metadata, and then run the comparison again and be able to see a successful result. A good example of a successful result can be seen here. We're getting an amber check mark. This tells us that the comparison was successful, but there are some things that we need to pay attention to. So looking down, we can see that information provided by the vendor, but let's take a look at academic sessions. What have we identified here? Here, everything looks green, but the vendor's included some notes for us to be aware of, and that's what's causing that amber check there. And we're saying only sessions within the current academic year should be included. Good information from the vendor tells you what they're really expecting. Looking further down to orgs.csv, we can see here there's a large amount of metadata included. This is showing us that both the vendor and the provider, that's both the district and the supplier, have agreed on the metadata. The supplier is expecting it, the district's providing it, we're just alerting you to the fact that it needs to be provided each time. And this is a good way of helping you focus your testing. These things that are highlighted as alerts really guide you to where issues may occur. Looking at users.csv, again we can see, similar to the other example, there's that note that email is required for teachers and optional for students, and that's what's triggered the alert here. So it can really help you identify which areas you may need to focus more on during testing, where there's extra metadata, where there's extra rules or notes that the vendor's provided that will help you have that smoother implementation. And that's how the comparison reporting functionality makes it easier for you to know if you're ready. You're ready to answer that question of, will this work? Now, one thing you might be wondering is, what does this share button do here? When it's active like this, what you've done is you've shared this successful comparison with the supplier. It means that their implementation team can see this same report and be able to understand what it is that you're bringing to them, whether there's any additional metadata that you might be providing or additional things that you need to be aware of. It helps them help you better during your implementation process. The default for this setting, though, is off, and if you want to revoke that permission at any time, you can, as I just did, toggle the switch. Likewise, if you've run a report and it's ended successfully, and you've decided, I now want to proceed with this vendor, you can toggle the switch and make it visible to the vendor now in their compatibility reports. So that's been a quick overview of the comparison functionality. Now that you've seen characterization and comparison, you've seen some of the benefits to districts from using OneEdTech. With characterization, you've seen how it's easy to confirm that your dataset is OneRoster compliant. You're meeting the needs of the specification, and you've been able to address any issues that you may have with your configuration, your SIS, or how you're packaging your data up for transmission. You've also got a better understanding of what's in that zip file, or what data you're exposing when you hand over your RESTful credentials, and that's hopefully helped you improve your data transparency and data security. With the comparison reports, you've been able to see how compatible you are with those suppliers that you want to work with, whether you're meeting all of the needs of their products. And where there are compatibility issues, you've been given clear guidance on what steps need to be taken to help you work with that supplier and have things go smoothly during implementation. Now, a question you may be asking is, how does OneEdTech fit into your workflow? As you've seen from the tool, we are here as a validation tool to ensure that you are ready for that implementation. So your data preparation is exactly as you do it today. You use your existing tools, generate your zip file if you're using OneRoster CSV zip, or generate your RESTful endpoints exactly the way you do today. You can then use OneEdTech to validate that dataset, know that that zip file is compliant, know that those endpoints are functioning as you'd expect them to. We're there to give you those answers and then give you that compatibility confidence so that you know going in that this will work, that you are compatible with the vendor's needs. Then for the data exchange, again, you use your existing method. You've already got established communication with many of these suppliers, and so you continue using that. Remember, as I've said throughout this demo, OneEdTech isn't a data transfer or data transformation tool. We're not retaining any of your data once we've generated that characterization fingerprint, and so we're not manipulating it or sharing it with third parties. We're here to give you that validation assurance and then that compatibility guarantee of will this work? Now, if you're interested in how to get started with OneEdTech, the good news is access to OneEdTech is an IMS member benefit. If you're already a member, let us know and we're happy to get you added to the growing number of organizations using OneEdTech. If your organization is not yet a member of IMS, you can get a free 6-month trial of IMS membership, including access to OneEdTech, if you partner with a supplier in our supplier referral program, or you're using a tool or service from one of our preferred partners. And you can find out more information about them at the IMS Global website. Thank you very much for watching today. And again, if you have any questions about this presentation or OneEdTech in general, you can contact us by visiting imsglobal.org.